December 17, 1944. The Ardennes forest slept beneath a suffocating silence. Snow hung in the air like ash, heavy and slow, muffling every sound except the growl of distant engines. Inside a dim farmhouse turned command post, a German officer leaned over a captured American map. His gloved finger traced the Meuse River, the line he believed they would reach by Christmas. The crackle of a radio, the smell of fuel, the low thud of artillery far away, all whispered of triumph. Reports spoke of American panic, abandoned vehicles, broken lines. For the first time in months, the German front seemed alive again. Outside, soldiers huddled near burning wrecks, whispering of victory. In the frozen dark, their breath turned to ghosts. Above them, the sky remained still. No Allied planes, no thunder from the air. The commander stepped outside, snow creaking beneath his boots, and looked up into the blackness. He allowed himself a thin smile. The fog was his ally. The world for a moment seemed to belong to Germany again, but before dawn the fog would lift. And when it did, the sky itself would betray the German dream. By the winter of 1944, the war in Europe seemed all but decided. The Allies had stormed ashore in Normandy that June, broken through France in a cascade of armored columns, and liberated Paris by August. Soviet armies were clawing westward across Poland, pushing the remnants of the Wehrmacht back toward their own borders. Inside the Führer's underground headquarters at the Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler refused to accept the tide of history. He no longer spoke of retreat, only of redemption. Germany's armies were bleeding on two fronts, yet Hitler believed one decisive blow in the West could shatter Allied unity. He envisioned an attack that would split the British and American forces in two, seize the port of Antwerp, and encircle 4 Allied armies in Belgium. The plan was bold, desperate, and utterly detached from Germany's remaining strength. It was called Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. To Hitler, it would be his second blitzkrieg, a final strike that might force the Allies into peace talks before the Red Army reached Berlin. To his generals, it was madness. But in the culture of obedience that still ruled the Reich, dissent had become a silent death sentence. The chosen battlefield was a quiet region few expected to see war again, the Ardennes, a forested labyrinth stretching between Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. It was the same terrain through which German tanks had burst in 1940 to crush France. Allied intelligence dismissed the area as impassable for large-scale operations. They were wrong, again. In the weeks leading to December, the Germans moved their forces under the cover of relentless fog and long nights. Entire divisions, tanks, artillery, men, vanished from the Eastern Front and reappeared in the forests of Eifel and Ardennes. Civilians whispered of endless convoys rumbling through the dark. The spearhead of the offensive would be the 6th SS Panzer Army under Sepp Dietrich, the 5th Panzer Army under Hasso von Manteuffel, and the 7th Army covering the southern flank. Among them were battle-hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, soldiers who had faced the Red Army's firestorms and survived. Now they were being asked to deliver one final miracle. Fuel was scarce, ammunition rationed, and supply lines fragile. Yet Hitler demanded silence. Complete radio blackout, no aerial reconnaissance, no premature movement. Surprise was their only weapon. The date was set for December 16, 1944. As dawn broke that morning, more than 200,000 German troops and 1,000 tanks opened fire along a front nearly 80 miles wide. The bombardment shattered the quiet countryside. Villages trembled, telephone lines snapped, and the American front, lightly manned by inexperienced divisions resting after months of combat, began to fracture. American units such as the 106th Infantry Division were overwhelmed within hours. Roads clogged with retreating vehicles and refugees. In the confusion, German commandos wearing U.S. uniforms infiltrated behind enemy lines, cutting communication and spreading panic. The offensive, to every eye, seemed unstoppable. Hitler's intuition appeared for a fleeting moment vindicated. Reports from the field poured in. Bridges taken, prisoners captured, resistance crumbling. Berlin's propaganda machine roared to life, declaring that the Western Front was collapsing. In the Ardennes, German commanders looked upon their maps with renewed confidence. The first phase of the plan had worked. The Allies were stunned, but beneath the surface of victory, cracks were already forming. Fuel reserves were running low. Logistics lagged behind the armored spearheads. Some units had to siphon fuel from abandoned Allied trucks just to keep moving. The Wehrmacht was burning its last breath. Still, the illusion of triumph lingered. The fog covered their movements. The skies remained closed to Allied bombers. For the German officers staring across white forests and frozen rivers, it felt as if destiny itself had paused to favor them once more. Yet far beyond the mist, American reinforcements were already on the move, and the fragile calm that cloaked the Ardennes would soon turn to fire. By the second day of the Ardennes offensive, German armored columns had carved deep into the forested landscape. Towns like Saint-Vith, Houffalize, and Bastogne became flashpoints of confusion and chaos. Roads churned to mud beneath tanks and trucks, soldiers slipping in snow and ice as artillery shells cracked the quiet. Joachim Peiper's 1st SS Panzer Division spearheaded the southern advance. Peiper, confident and ruthless, moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Convoys stretched for miles, armored cars leading the way, infantry packed tightly behind. Resistance seemed weak. Small pockets of American troops were scattered, isolated, and overwhelmed. Prisoners whispered tales of a lost forest where Germans had seized towns without opposition. The weather, grim and overcast, became the enemy's unlikely ally. Dense fog grounded the Allied air forces, silencing the thunder of bombers that might have halted the advance. For nearly 48 hours, the sky was a vault of gray. No planes, no reconnaissance, no warning. Maps and reports filtered slowly to headquarters. Confusion reigned. American commanders scrambled. Intelligence had failed to anticipate the scale and speed of the offensive. Many units were understrength, exhausted, or recently reorganized after previous campaigns in Normandy and France. For the first time, a sense of panic spread in the ranks. Supply lines became tangled. Radio communication faltered. Despite these setbacks, German commanders began to feel invincible. Peiper's notes described towns captured with minimal resistance, bridges seized intact, roads cleared of opposition. The Wehrmacht had broken the American line, at least. That was what they believed. But even as the Germans advanced, problems simmered beneath the surface. Fuel shortages threatened the armored spearheads. Infantry lagged behind tanks, struggling to keep pace on narrow, snow-filled roads. Artillery, essential for support, was slow to redeploy. Units became isolated. Morale among troops oscillated between exhilaration and fear, as the realization of overextension grew. On the northern flank, Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army advanced toward the Meuse, hoping to split Allied forces and capture Antwerp. At first, the Americans offered weak resistance. Towns were abandoned, soldiers surrendered in confusion, and civilians fled before advancing tanks. Commanders sent confident reports back to Hitler, reinforcing his belief that the offensive was on track. Yet the Ardennes was unforgiving. Forested ridges, frozen rivers, and narrow passes slowed movement. German troops encountered pockets of stubborn American defense, most famously at Saint-Vith, where under-equipped units held for days, buying crucial time for reinforcements. Small delays cascaded into larger logistical problems. Fuel depots emptied faster than they could be replenished. Supply trucks became targets and armored units began to run low. By December 21st, after nearly a week of relentless advance, the Germans had created a salient nearly 60 miles deep, yet it was dangerously narrow at points. Roads clogged with vehicles, tanks stuck in mud, and infantry stretched thin. Victory seemed within reach, yet it was a fragile illusion. Meanwhile, across the lines, Allied commanders were not idle. Reports of the German advance alarmed generals like Eisenhower and Patton, who immediately began rerouting divisions to plug gaps. Logistics moved at a breakneck pace. Fresh troops, artillery, and fuel were concentrated, preparing for the inevitable counteroffensive. In the fog-choked forests, German commanders allowed themselves a final moment of triumph. They believed the Ardennes to be conquered. Snow-laden trees masked the horizon. Radio silence preserved the illusion. Every map looked promising. Every report reinforced the narrative. Yet the Ardennes would not remain silent for long. Beyond the fog, aircraft were ready, artillery repositioned, and American determination stiffened by adversity. The tide was poised to turn. Before long, the red skies would appear, a fiery warning that no strategy, no map, and no confidence could fully control the chaos of war. In the frozen Ardennes, German soldiers trudged through deep snow, their breath forming clouds that vanished into the gray fog. Weeks of campaigning on the Eastern Front had already worn them thin, yet they were driven forward by a mix of duty, propaganda, and fear. Each step on the icy forest floor carried the weight of expectations from Hitler and his generals. The men had seen their comrades fall in countless battles, some mangled in mud, others frozen by the cold. Yet here morale was artificially high. Reports from frontline units were edited, embellished, and circulated to maintain the illusion of progress. Soldiers clung to these stories, believing the Ardennes offensive would redeem years of hardship. Yet reality crept in with every misfiring tank and every stalled supply truck. Exhaustion gnawed at their resolve. Hunger and frostbite whispered that victory might not be what it seemed. Still, they pressed on, moving through forests and villages with a disciplined silence. In quiet moments, they glanced at the blackened sky, not knowing that soon it would erupt with flames beyond imagination. Across the thin, snow-covered roads, young American soldiers confronted the German advance with confusion and terror. Many were inexperienced, drafted hastily after months of combat, and sent to hold positions they barely understood. The 106th Infantry Division, for example, had recently arrived from quieter sectors, untested in winter warfare. They awoke on December 16th to the thunder of artillery and the sight of German tanks rolling through the forest. Communication lines were cut. Commanders struggled to coordinate scattered units. Panic spread quickly as towns fell and bridges were seized. For many, the forest seemed endless, an invisible enemy guiding armored columns with impossible precision. Yet even in desperation, American resolve emerged. Small groups of infantry held roads, set ambushes, and resisted against overwhelming odds. Their defiance was quiet, tactical, and human, a stark contrast to the mechanical advance of the Germans. Every delay, every stand was buying time for reinforcements and air power that would soon change the tide. The Ardennes was more than just a battlefield. It was an opponent in itself. Dense forests, frozen rivers, and narrow roads funneled movement and shaped the fight. German tanks and convoys found their mobility restricted. Trees became obstacles, snowdrifts traps, and fog a constant veil. Maps showed a clear path, but reality was chaotic. Roads that seemed straightforward twisted into steep ridges and marshy valleys. Tanks became stuck. Artillery struggled to reach positions. Every step forward required human effort and mechanical persistence. The terrain slowed advances, amplified mistakes, and created micro-battles in villages and crossroads. The forest also offered cover. German forces initially exploited it, hiding from Allied reconnaissance. Yet the same cover delayed logistics, concealed their flanks, and eventually became a vulnerability. What seemed like an ally, the foggy, silent forest, was in truth a silent combatant, shaping victory and defeat with impartial precision. Within days, the battlefield had become a labyrinth of human struggle, mechanical endurance, and natural obstacles. Soldiers, young and old, German and American, fought in ways that would never appear on official maps. Yet despite the apparent German momentum, forces far beyond the front lines, leadership decisions, technological superiority, and moral resilience were quietly preparing to intervene. The stage was set for the turning point. The Ardennes, long shrouded in fog, was about to erupt into fire, and the human, technological, and leadership angles would converge into a decisive moment. In the Ardennes, steel moved as if alive. German panzer divisions, King Tigers, Panthers, and older Panzer IVs rumbled through snow-choked roads. Their crews relied on mechanical precision, gunners calculating distances in frozen villages, drivers navigating muddy tracks, and commanders coordinating columns via radios that crackled under winter interference. The Americans countered with M4 Shermans, M10 tank destroyers, and artillery dug into frozen earth. While individually less powerful than German tanks, American forces relied on mobility, concentrated firepower, and combined arms tactics. Anti-tank guns hidden in snowdrifts and behind village walls tore into the German advance. Mines buried under snow awaited the overconfident. Aircraft were absent at first, grounded by dense fog and low clouds, but every soldier knew their eventual return would tilt the scales. Radios transmitted orders with tension. Mechanical whirs of engines punctuated human commands. and the landscape itself became a theater for technological duels. For a moment it seemed like man and machine were moving in unison toward destiny, yet the Ardennes would remind them how fragile even the most powerful machines could be under winter, terrain, and human ingenuity. Leadership in the Ardennes was tested to extremes. On the German side, commanders like Sepp Dietrich and Joachim Peiper projected confidence, issuing orders that pushed men and machines to their limits. Their belief in Hitler's plan was absolute, even as supply lines faltered. Every captured village and delayed American unit reinforced their conviction. Yet overconfidence hid cracks that would soon be exposed. American leadership, in contrast, balanced urgency and adaptability. General Patton, stationed to the south, ordered his Third Army to pivot north with unprecedented speed. Reports of the German advance spurred Eisenhower and Bradley to coordinate reinforcements, concentrate artillery, and prioritize vulnerable sectors. Decisions were made in hours that would decide the fate of entire divisions. Morale and clarity of command proved decisive, especially in pockets like Bastogne, where surrounded American troops held under extreme cold, hunger, and enemy fire. Commanders on both sides understood one truth: the Ardennes was a war of margins. Each decision, when to advance, when to hold, when to conserve resources, carried consequences measured in lives, equipment, and the ultimate survival of armies. Amid the strategic and technological chessboard, the Ardennes was also a crucible of morality. Soldiers witnessed the consequences of total war. Civilians fleeing burning towns, prisoners executed or abused, villages reduced to rubble. Reports emerged of massacres, such as the killings at Bastogne's surrounding villages by advancing German units, though sporadic, chilling, and verifiable. The human cost extended to combatants themselves. Exhausted soldiers faced frostbite, hunger, and the psychological terror of unseen artillery shells. Young American recruits learned that courage was often a matter of seconds separating life from death. On the German side, obedience and indoctrination masked fear, yet the strain of winter and isolation gnawed at men hardened by prior campaigns. Every choice had a moral weight. To advance or delay, to execute orders blindly or question commands, these decisions echoed across families, communities, and the broader course of the war. The Ardennes would test not just strategy, but the human conscience itself. In these frozen forests under gray skies and heavy fog, human will, technology, and leadership all collided. The Germans believed their victory inevitable. The Americans, beleaguered but resolute, prepared unseen defenses. The forest, silent and impartial, held the tension of a world poised on the edge. Soon the fog would lift. The Ardennes, long a theater of deceptive calm, would erupt in fire. The human, technological, and moral dimensions would converge, and the night sky itself would betray those who had believed themselves unstoppable. December 23, 1944. The fog that had cloaked the Ardennes for days began to thin, revealing a landscape transformed. The silence that had favored German armored columns vanished under the roar of American artillery and the distant drone of returning aircraft. Command posts that had brimmed with confidence now felt tension in every frozen corner. German units that had surged forward with precision suddenly found themselves exposed. Panzer columns, long and narrow along snow-choked roads, became easy targets. From hidden positions on ridges, American artillery unleashed shells that tore through steel and snow alike. The night sky glowed intermittently with fiery bursts, tracers burning vehicles, and explosions painting the clouds in shades of red and orange. Joachim Peiper's 1st SS Panzer Division was caught mid-advance. Tanks, some low on fuel, stalled under bombardment. Infantry scrambled for cover, slipping on icy slopes as the forest itself seemed to echo with fire and chaos. For the first time, the illusion of inevitability shattered. The Allied air forces returned with brutal timing. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs sliced through residual fog, strafing columns and supply lines. Bombers dropped payloads on key intersections, turning roads into smoldering traps. German commanders had believed the skies would remain silent. Now the heavens themselves seemed allied with the Americans. Reports filtered back to German HQ. Bridges destroyed, columns immobilized, towns abandoned in panic. Communications faltered. Orders sent in confidence never reached forward units. delayed by frozen equipment and shattered lines. Soldiers who had believed victory was at hand now faced a sky ignited with fire, a tangible symbol of the turning tide. In towns like St. Vith, American defenders emerged from hiding to regroup, reinforcing roadblocks and setting ambushes. Their coordinated resistance slowed the German advance further, buying critical time. Every delay compounded the growing logistical nightmare. Fuel reserves dwindled, ammunition ran short, and the morale of once confident units began to waver. Even within command posts, officers felt the shift. Sepp Dietrich, reviewing aerial photographs, noted the devastation along key routes. Reports from Piper detailed units stranded, vehicles ablaze, and men wounded or captured. For the first time, German leadership faced the terrifying reality. The offensive was no longer unstoppable. By the night of December 23rd, the Ardennes no longer whispered of victory. The air was thick with smoke, fire, and the acrid smell of fuel. The German dream, once so palpable in command rooms and forest trails, was under siege. The soldiers, human and machine alike, could only react. Tanks fired blindly into darkness, infantry huddled in ruined villages, and the forest became a maze of chaos. The sky above, now streaked with red, was a constant reminder that the war was far from over, and that the Germans were beginning to lose their grip. Amid the burning columns and strafing planes, the Americans' resilience and logistical genius began to emerge. Reinforcements moved with precision. Artillery crews readjusted targeting. Commanders coordinated counterattacks. The Ardennes, once a theater of German opportunity, was turning into a crucible of failure for those who had counted on silence, pug, and overconfidence. The night stretched on, and the glow of fire illuminated frozen faces. For German soldiers, the red sky was no longer a signal of victory. It was a harbinger of collapse, of a turning tide that they could no longer control. December 24, 1944. The town of Bastogne lay in the heart of the Ardennes salient, surrounded on all sides by German forces. Roads leading in and out were choked with snow, tanks, and supply wagons. Yet the 101st Airborne Division, though understrength and poorly equipped for winter, had fortified the town with relentless determination. When German commanders demanded surrender, General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied with a single word: nuts. The defiance was simple, yet profound. It galvanized troops across the region. Bastogne was more than a defensive position. It became a symbol that the German momentum could be halted, even crushed. The weather cleared further on December 25th. American artillery rained down with devastating accuracy. From elevated positions, gunners targeted every bottleneck in the German advance. Columns stalled. Tanks already low on fuel were abandoned. Soldiers, exhausted and disoriented, tried to regroup amid the smoke and fire. But the sky above had turned fully red with the conflagration unleashed by Allied artillery and airstrikes. Meanwhile, General George S. Patton's Third Army executed an audacious maneuver. Pivoting north from positions hundreds of miles away, his armored divisions raced through treacherous snow and ice, cutting off German supply lines and reinforcing key towns. The speed and coordination of this counteroffensive caught the Germans by surprise. Routes that once promised rapid advance now became corridors of destruction and retreat. Piper's spearhead, once the pride of the SS, found itself isolated. Fuel shortages destroyed bridges, and relentless American attacks forced columns to abandon vehicles and heavy weapons. Soldiers trudged through the snow, hauling what they could carry, watching as tanks and trucks burned behind them. The dream of a rapid victory dissolved into chaos and desperation. December 26th to 27 brought the full return of American air power. P-47 Thunderbolts strafed retreating convoys while bombers destroyed supply depots and rail lines. The forested Ardennes, once shrouded in fog and silence, now roared with fire, smoke, and mechanical fury. German commanders could no longer control the battlefield. Every decision was reactive. Every movement was hindered by terrain, weather, and American persistence. By December 28th, German forces were in full retreat. Bastogne remained unbroken. Other towns, taken in the initial days, were recaptured. The salient narrowed. Panic replaced confidence in the command posts. Sepp Dietrich, Piper, and von Manteuffel faced not only tactical defeat but a psychological one. The belief in an unstoppable offensive had collapsed under the red night sky. Casualties mounted. German losses were immense. Tens of thousands of men killed, wounded, or captured, hundreds of tanks destroyed or abandoned, and artillery rendered useless. American forces, while battered, had held critical positions and inflicted disproportionate damage. The Ardennes offensive, once a lightning strike meant to change the course of the war, had become a cautionary tale of overreach and hubris. The night sky, illuminated by fires set by retreating convoys and bombardments, bore witness to the undoing of the German dream. Soldiers on both sides felt its presence, a vivid, terrifying reminder that control over war is never absolute. The forest, silent observer and opponent alike, had exacted its toll. By January 1st, 1945, the front lines had stabilized. The German army, depleted and demoralized, could no longer threaten Antwerp or split the Allied forces. The Ardennes offensive had failed, not merely through opposition or technology, but through a convergence of factors: logistics, terrain, human endurance, and the indomitable will of the defenders. The turning point was clear. The night sky, once a canvas of hope for the Germans, had become a testament to fire, chaos, and the limits of ambition. For commanders and soldiers alike, it marked the moment when the illusion of victory was irrevocably shattered. January 2nd, 1945. The Ardennes forest was silent once more, but the quiet bore the weight of devastation. Villages were reduced to rubble, roads lined with burnt-out tanks and abandoned trucks and snow stained with blood. The German offensive, which had begun with such promise and precision, had collapsed under the combined force of terrain, weather, and American resistance. Casualties on the German side were staggering. Estimates suggest around 80,000 men killed, wounded, or missing, with hundreds of tanks and self-propelled guns destroyed or abandoned. Units that had spearheaded the initial advance were shattered, their cohesion irreparably broken. Soldiers who survived carried frostbite, hunger, and the trauma of watching comrades fall or retreat under fire. American losses, while significant, were markedly lower, approximately 19,000 killed, wounded, or missing. The 101st Airborne, holding Bastogne, suffered heavily, yet their resilience became emblematic of American determination. Small acts of heroism, like McAuliffe's nuts response, would echo for decades as symbols of morale under extreme pressure. Strategically, the failure of Operation Wacht am Rhein had immediate consequences. Germany's hope of splitting the Allied forces and capturing Antwerp vanished. The Ardennes salient was reduced, and the Wehrmacht's remaining armored reserves were depleted. Fuel shortages and mechanical attrition had taken a toll that could not be reversed. Hitler's reaction was fury. Orders were issued blaming generals and soldiers alike, yet the facts on the ground were undeniable. The German command structure, already strained, began to fracture. Piper's SS units retreated in disarray, their former momentum replaced by exhaustion and demoralization. Supply convoys that had once symbolized precision now carried only what could be salvaged from burning wrecks. Civilians, too, paid a heavy price. Towns like St. Vith and Houffalize were caught between the advancing and retreating armies. Homes were burned, food and fuel scarce, and families displaced. The forested Ardennes, which had been a backdrop to tactical brilliance, now bore witness to the human cost of miscalculation and ambition. The failure of the offensive marked a turning point in the broader war. The Western Allies regained the initiative, their momentum restored. Patton's rapid counterattack and the resilience of American forces demonstrated that the Wehrmacht, despite years of experience and prior victories, could no longer dictate terms. The myth of German invincibility, cultivated over years of blitzkrieg, had been irrevocably broken. Morale on both sides shifted. American troops, bolstered by their success, pressed on with renewed confidence. German soldiers, many of whom had survived the ordeal, returned to defensive positions with the bitter knowledge that their army was increasingly on the back foot. Commanders faced not only strategic defeat but a profound psychological blow. The illusion of control shattered beneath the red glow of fire. The Ardennes, once a theater of audacious planning, became a testament to the limits of ambition, the unpredictability of nature, and the resilience of those defending their ground. The stage was now set for the final push into Germany, a landscape forever marked by the scars of December 1944 and the night sky that had burned red with American fire. By mid-January 1945, the Ardennes had returned to a deceptive calm. Snow drifted over abandoned tanks, frozen corpses, and the remnants of shattered villages. Yet beneath the quiet lay the echoes of catastrophe for the German army. The Wehrmacht had expended its last reserves in a gamble that failed spectacularly. Experienced officers, tanks, and artillery had been lost at a time when Germany could least afford it. The human toll was staggering. Tens of thousands of soldiers, many hardened veterans of Eastern Front campaigns, were dead, captured, or injured. The psychological impact extended beyond physical loss. Survivors carried the trauma of overconfidence shattered by relentless resistance and fire from the sky. Soldiers who had believed themselves invincible now faced the bitter truth. Victory could not be conjured from maps, orders, or ambition alone. On the Allied side, the battle reinforced confidence and cohesion. Units that had faced near annihilation proved their resilience, and commanders learned valuable lessons in rapid mobilization, defensive fortification, and combined arms coordination. Patton's maneuvering, the steadfast defense of Bastogne, and the re-establishment of supply lines showcased the effectiveness of American logistical planning and leadership under crisis. Strategically, the Ardennes' failure had long-term consequences. Germany could no longer hope to split the Western Allies or capture Antwerp. The loss of armored divisions and fuel reserves weakened the Wehrmacht's ability to mount future offensives. Hitler's insistence on ambitious operations, despite dwindling resources, exposed the disconnect between political vision and battlefield reality. The once feared Wehrmacht was increasingly reactive, defending territory it could no longer hold with confidence. The psychological blow extended to German leadership. Commanders who had executed the offensive with meticulous planning now faced humiliation and blame. Piper's SS units, once elite spearheads, became symbols of misjudgment and overreach. Dietrich and von Manteuffel confronted the reality that no skill, bravery, or discipline could compensate for insufficient logistics and miscalculated timing. Civilians in Belgium and Luxembourg experienced displacement, hunger, and destruction. Fires, shelling, and military occupation left towns in ruins. Refugees traversed the snow-covered landscape, bearing witness to the collateral cost of strategic hubris. Local memory would preserve these experiences for decades, reminding historians that war's consequences are never limited to the battlefield alone. The Ardennes offensive also reshaped the trajectory of the war in Europe. By failing to achieve its objectives, Germany ceded the initiative to the Allies. The Western Front would remain under Allied pressure, advancing steadily toward the Rhine and eventually into the heart of Germany. Simultaneously, the Red Army pressed from the east, and Germany's dual-front vulnerability became increasingly acute. The failed offensive hastened the collapse of German operational capacity, signaling that the Reich's final months were approaching with inevitability. By late January, survivors on both sides reflected on the magnitude of what had occurred. For the Americans, it was a triumph of coordination, morale, and adaptability. For the Germans, it was a cautionary tale of ambition exceeding capacity, of strategy faltering under the weight of reality. The red skies over the Ardennes, once a symbol of imminent victory for German commanders, had become a testament to fire, chaos, and human limitation. The battle had ended, but its lessons would endure. Logistics, terrain, morale, and timing can outweigh numbers or even skill. The Ardennes, scarred and silent, bore witness to the costs of overreach and the resilience of those who refused to yield. From this crucible, the Western Allies emerged stronger, while the German army struggled to recover the initiative it had never truly regained. The Ardennes, long a forest of quiet snow and shadowed ridges, now rests in silence. Tanks are abandoned beneath frost, artillery rusts in frozen fields, and villages bear the memory of fire and chaos. Yet in that silence lies the truth of war, a lesson in ambition, resilience, and human endurance. The German commanders who believed the offensive could turn the tide were undone not by a single failure, but by the convergence of many forces: terrain that betrayed them, supply lines that could not keep pace, soldiers stretched beyond human limits, and an enemy that adapted, endured, and struck back with precision. The night sky, once imagined as a canvas of triumph, had become red with fire, a vivid marker of hubris meeting reality. For the soldiers on both sides, the Ardennes was more than strategy. It was a test of courage, of morale under impossible circumstances, of the weight of orders and the instincts of survival. In the cold, smoke-filled forests, human determination often mattered more than steel or numbers. Bastogne, frozen and surrounded, became a symbol that even the smallest acts of defiance could alter the course of a battle. Strategically, the offensive's failure accelerated the collapse of the Third Reich. Germany could no longer dictate the terms of the war in the West. The Allies regained momentum, and the illusion of invincibility that had haunted Europe for years finally shattered. The Ardennes demonstrated that no matter the precision of plans or ferocity of ambition, war is ultimately unpredictable, shaped by human resilience, the environment, and the unforgiving reality of logistics and timing. And yet, amidst the devastation, there is a quiet humanity. Fire that once promised victory became a signal of humility. Loss revealed courage. Chaos exposed ingenuity. In history as in life, moments of failure illuminate the limits of ambition and the enduring strength of those who persevere. The Ardennes offensive, with its red skies and frozen forests, stands as a testament, a reminder that even in the darkest nights human resolve can withstand fire, and even in the heart of hubris truth will eventually shine.